So we've had a very full day today, Wayne, with many interesting comments with your interview earlier today and the article itself. I'm getting the impression, though, that there's still a degree of confusion about what exactly AI is. That people are confusing elements of online learning with artificial intelligence. And would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I think the problem is that what AI is seems to change all the time, and the experts don't really agree. And something that we think of as AI today, tomorrow just becomes a standard thing. So on our mobile phones, you might use Siri, and that's got an awful lot of AI in it, but we kind of forget the AI there, and we just think, well, it's just I talk to my phone, it's no biggie. So I think that's part of the problem, is that AI is changing all the time. And then I think there are another problem, that sometimes too many things are included under the AI banner, and other things that should be included under the AI banner are excluded. So we both have too many things and too few things. So the too many things, as you suggest, are things like online learning management systems, such as Blackboard or Collaborate or Moodle. And, increasingly these systems are getting a little bit of AI in the background. But for the most part, what they deliver doesn't use any AI and isn't an AI. But also things like digital games-based learning, or the use of augmented reality and virtual reality, all of that kind of stuff, it can use AI, but mostly they don't. On the other hand, when you speak to some people, AI is assumed to be nothing more than data. So it's taking data, collecting data, and analyzing that data. And it's absolutely true that that is a huge part of AI today. Not new. This was developed in the early days of the AI, uh, when AI was first being developed. It's simply that it went underground for a long time because they didn't have sufficient data and the computers weren't fast enough. But now we have ridiculously fast computers, and thanks to the internet, we've got oodles of data. So that's why the data specific type of AI, machine learning as it's properly called, has grown so quickly and has become so dominant. But there's another type of AI that was dominant for decades beforehand, that's referred to as rule-based or symbolic AI. And that still exists. So a lot of the tools that are used today to deliver learning, so the so-called intelligent tutoring systems, many of those are based on rules. They're not based on data. Sometimes there is a mix between them, but my general point is, when we think about AI, we can't exclude the rule-based AI that has very little to do with data. And just one final point here is that there's a lot of AI experts who are now saying that the dominant approach of the moment, machine learning, is reaching a ceiling that it can't go above. So you can throw 3 times as much data at the question, and that doesn't improve the situation, doesn't improve the learning. So there are some who argue that the next paradigm step is when rule-based AI and machine learning somehow come together. And there are others who think it's other approaches. So, it's very reasonable that people don't really understand what AI is, because it's complicated and because it changes all the time. And that's why it's really important that when we have conversations, which we must have, in my opinion, between adult educators and the computer scientists, we often need people in the middle, people like me, who I speak a bit of education because I've been an educator all my life. I speak a bit of AI because I've been working with AI for a long time. And our job is to do the translation so that these two communities can connect and get over those hurdles. Because whilst it is true that as we've said, a lot of educators don't understand AI. I would also argue it's true that a lot of computer scientists don't understand education, and we have to bring those two groups together.
Yeah, you mentioned this, of course, a lot in your article, this need for the conversation between the educators and the developers. The how we best bring that about. How do we begin to start the conversations? I think that's probably a question that is in many people's minds. How do we get the educators and the developers together? Now, in one of the comments today, somebody was talking about having much more startup groups working on these problems, having much more open resource type activities to take it away from the big commercial entities like Google, Facebook, etc., etc. What is your opinion on that? Like, how would we go about doing all of that?
It's very challenging because the big companies have access to that data. And so that's why they're in such powerful positions with the contemporary machine learning approach. But how do we address that? By holding the conversations. So, leadership within the adult education community should set up more conversations. So the conversation we're having today is great because this is exactly what we're doing, trying to get these connections together. And we just need to accelerate this. We need more of this so that educators have a real opportunity to understand what AI all means and has the opportunity to speak with the computer scientists. But yeah, so it's through that kind of connection. And a thing I was involved in a couple of weeks ago was the Digi-Edu hack, which deliberately brings together educators and young people with computer scientists to try and develop new ideas and new approaches. Now, that's very powerful because the conversation is starting, and that's what we need more of, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess to summarize everything that's been happening in today in this discussion is that to take away a message, the message is that AI in education is in its infancy. That there's a lot to learn, both from the developer's point of view, but also from the educator's point of view, to understand what are the problems and how can AI address or help with these problems. It's a tool to support education. It's not something that will deliver education in its own right. So more thinking, more research, more development, more conversations. I think those are the messages that you want to convey today.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, firstly, the notion that it's in its infancy. It's a 50-year-old infant, and it's not so much that it's early. In my opinion, it's going in the wrong direction, and it's been going in the wrong direction for a long time because the majority of the effort, the majority of the tools are designed to replace teacher functions, but they can't do that. It doesn't work. And so what we need to do is, by having the conversations we've been talking about, we need to redirect that trajectory. We need to think about what are the genuine problems that we have in AI. Sorry, in education, in adult education, be it formal, informal, form, whatever it is. What are the genuine problems as identified by professional adult educators on the one hand and our students on the other hand? And once we have a good handle on what those problems are, then we can bring the computer scientists into the conversation to find out, well, how can these problems be addressed using those incredible technologies? So it's not simply that we're early days, it's that we've been going off in the wrong direction. And so we really need that conversation to start, and we need to reprioritize what these tools are used to do, and in ways that empower teachers, enhance student agency, augment inclusion, ensure that the education that we have throughout adult education is there for the common good. And that's what we need to do. We need to point the AI bandwagon in that direction rather than the direction we have now.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. And I think maybe we'll end on that point, because we could start a whole new discussion just on how we turn the cart around, how we begin to point it in another direction. It remains for me just to say a very heartfelt thanks to you, Dr. Holmes, for your time, for your very interesting insight into in education, although you have told us that it's already 50 years old, so not that new, but still. I want to make one final announcement before we end, that, if you've enjoyed this discussion, there is another one coming up on the 14th of December on the future of skills. And I'm sure that will, I know it's near Christmas, but, it's a very interesting topic. And we look forward to seeing you all as engaged in that discussion as you were in this one today. So thank you again, Dr. Holmes, and goodbye to everybody.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with everyone.